The first day of the Battle of Gettysburg during the American Civil War took place on July 1, 1863, and began as an engagement between isolated units of the Army of Northern Virginia under Confederate General Robert E. Lee and the Army of the Potomac under Union Major General George G. Meade. It soon escalated into a major battle which culminated in the outnumbered and defeated Union forces retreating to the high ground south of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The first-day battle proceeded in three phases as combatants continued to arrive at the battlefield. In the morning, two brigades of Confederate Major General Henry Heth's division were delayed by dismounted Union cavalrymen under Brigadier General John Buford. As infantry reinforcements arrived under Major General John F. Reynolds of the Union I Corps, the Confederate assaults down the Chambersburg Pike were repulsed, although General Reynolds was killed. By early afternoon, the Union 11 Corps had arrived, and the Union position was in a semicircle from west to north of the town. The Confederate Second Corps under Lieutenant General Richard S. Ewell began a massive assault from the north, with Major General Robert E. Rhodes's division attacking from Oak Hill and Major General Jubal A. Early's division attacking across the open fields north of town. The Union lines generally held under extremely heavy pressure, although the salient at Barlow's Knoll was overrun. The third phase of the battle came as Rhodes renewed his assault from the north and Heth returned with his entire division from the west, accompanied by the division of Major General W. Dorsey Pender. Heavy fighting in Herbst's Woods and on Oak Ridge finally caused the Union line to collapse. Some of the Federals conducted a fighting withdrawal through the town, suffering heavy casualties and losing many prisoners. Others simply retreated. They took up good defensive positions on Cemetery Hill and waited for additional attacks. Despite discretionary orders from Robert E. Lee to take the heights if practicable, Richard Ewell chose not to attack. Historians have debated ever since how the battle might have ended differently if he had found it practicable to do so. Morning, defense by Buford's cavalry. On the morning of July 1, Union cavalry in the division of Brigadier General John Buford were awaiting the approach of Confederate infantry forces from the direction of Cashtown, to the northwest. Confederate forces from the brigade of Brigadier General J. Johnston Pettigrew had briefly clashed with Union forces the day before but believed they were Pennsylvania militia of little consequence, not the regular Army cavalry that was screening the approach of the Army of the Potomac. General Buford realized the importance of the high ground directly to the south of Gettysburg. He knew that if the Confederates could gain control of the heights, Meade's army would have a hard time dislodging them. He decided to utilize three ridges west of Gettysburg: Hare Ridge, McPherson Ridge, and Seminary Ridge. These were appropriate terrain for a delaying action by his small division against superior Confederate infantry forces, meant to buy time awaiting the arrival of Union infantrymen who could occupy the strong defensive positions south of town: Cemetery Hill, Cemetery Ridge, and Culp's Hill. Early that morning, Reynolds, who was commanding the left wing of the Army of the Potomac, ordered his corps to march to Buford's location, with the 11 Corps to follow closely behind. Confederate Major General Henry Heth's division, from Lt. General A. P. Hill's 3rd Corps, advanced towards Gettysburg. Heth deployed no cavalry and led, unconventionally, with the artillery battalion of Major William J. Pegram. Two infantry brigades followed, commanded by Brigadier Gens. James J. Archer and Joseph A. Davis, proceeding easterly in columns along the Chambersburg Pike. 3 miles west of town, about 7:30 a.m., Heth's two brigades met light resistance from cavalry vedettes and deployed into line. Eventually, they reached dismounted troopers from Colonel William Gamble's cavalry brigade. The first shot of the battle was claimed to be fired by Lieutenant Marcellus E. Jones of the 8th Illinois Cavalry, fired at an unidentified man on a gray horse over a half-mile away. The act was merely symbolic. Buford's 2,748 troopers would soon be faced with 7,600 Confederate infantrymen, deploying from columns into line of battle. Gamble's men mounted determined resistance and delaying tactics from behind fence posts with rapid fire from their breech-loading carbines. It is a modern myth that they were armed with multi-shot repeating carbines. Nevertheless, they were able to fire 2 or 3 times faster than a muzzle-loaded carbine or rifle. Also, The breech-loading design meant that Union troops did not have to stand to reload and could do so safely behind cover. This was a great advantage over the Confederates, who still had to stand to reload, thus providing an easier target. But this was so far a relatively bloodless affair. By 10:20 a.m., the Confederates had reached Hare Ridge and had pushed the Federal cavalrymen east to McPherson Ridge. When the vanguard of the I Corps finally arrived, the division of Major General James S. Wadsworth. The troops were led personally by General Reynolds, who conferred briefly with Buford and hurried back to bring more men forward. Davies versus Cutler. The morning infantry fighting occurred on either side of the Chambersburg Pike, mostly on McPherson Ridge. To the north, an unfinished railroad bed opened 3 shallow cuts in the ridges. To the south, the dominant features were Willoughby Run and Herbst Woods. Brigadier General Lysander Cutler's Union Brigade opposed Davis's brigade. 3 of Cutler's regiments were north of the Pike, 2 to the south. To the left of Cutler, Brigadier General Solomon Meredith's Iron Brigade opposed Archer. General Reynolds directed both brigades into position and placed guns from the main battery of Captain James A. Hall where Calves had stood earlier. While the general rode his horse along the east end of Herbst Woods, shouting "Forward men! Forward for God's sake, and drive those fellows out of the woods," he fell from his horse, killed instantly by a bullet striking him behind the ear. Major General Abner Doubleday assumed command of the I Corps. On the right of the Union line, 3 regiments of Cutler's brigade were fired on by Davis's brigade before they could get into position on the ridge. Davis's line overlapped the right of Cutler's, making the Union position untenable, and Wadsworth ordered Cutler's regiments back to Seminary Ridge. The commander of the 147th New York, Lieutenant Colonel Francis C. Miller, was shot before he could inform his troops of the withdrawal, and they remained to fight under heavy pressure until a second order came. In under 30 minutes, 45% of General Cutler's 1,007 men became casualties, with the 147th losing 207 of its 380 officers and men. Some of Davis's victorious men turned toward the Union position south of the railroad bed while others drove east towards Seminary Ridge. This defocused the Confederate effort north of the Pike. Archer versus Meredith. South of the Pike, Archer's men were expecting an easy fight against dismounted cavalrymen and were astonished to recognize the black hardee hats worn by the men facing them through the woods. The famous Iron Brigade, formed from regiments in the western states of Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin, had a reputation as fierce, tenacious fighters. As the Confederates crossed Willoughby Run and climbed the slope into Herbst Woods, they were enveloped on their right by the longer Union line, the reverse of the situation north of the Pike. Brigadier General Archer was captured in the fighting, the first general officer in Robert E. Lee's army to suffer that fate. Archer was most likely positioned around the 14th Tennessee when he was captured by Private Patrick Maloney of Company G, 2nd Wisconsin, a brave, patriotic and fervent young Irishman. Archer resisted capture, but Maloney overpowered him. Maloney was killed later that day, but he received the Medal of Honor for his exploit. When Archer was taken to the rear, he encountered his former Army colleague General Doubleday, who greeted him good-naturedly. "Good morning, Archer. How are you? I am glad to see you." Archer replied, "Well, I'm not glad to see you by a damn sight." Railroad cut. At around 11 a.m., Doubleday sent his reserve regiment, the 6th Wisconsin, an Iron Brigade regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Rufus Adors, north in the direction of Davis's disorganized brigade. The Wisconsin men paused at the fence along the Pike and fired, which halted Davis's attack on Cutler's men and caused many of them to seek cover in the unfinished railroad cut. The 6th joined the 95th New York and the 84th New York, a demi-brigade commanded by Colonel E. B. Fowler, along the Pike. The 3 regiments charged to the railroad cut, where Davis's men were seeking cover. The majority of the 600-foot cut was too deep to be an effective firing position as deep as 15 feet. Making the situation more difficult was the absence of their overall commander, General Davis, whose location was unknown. The men of the 3 regiments nevertheless faced daunting fire as they charged towards the cut. The 6th Wisconsin's American flag went down at least 3 times during the charge. At one point Dawes took up the fallen flag before it was seized from him by a corporal of the color guard. As the Union line neared the Confederates, its flanks became folded back and it took on the appearance of an inverted V. When the Union men reached a railroad cut, vicious hand-to-hand and bayonet fighting broke out. They were able to pour enfilading fire from both ends of the cut, and many Confederates considered surrender. Colonel Dawes took the initiative by shouting, "Where is the colonel of this regiment?" Major John Blair of the 2nd Mississippi stood up and responded, "Who are you?" Dawes replied, "I command this regiment. Surrender or I will fire." Dawes later described what happened next. The officer replied not a word, but promptly handed me his sword, and his men, who still held them, threw down their muskets. The coolness, self-possession, and discipline which held back our men from pouring a general volley saved 100 lives of the enemy, and as my mind goes back to the fearful excitement of the moment, I marvel at it. Colonel Rufus A. Dawes, service with the 6th Wisconsin Volunteers. Despite this surrender, leaving Dawes standing awkwardly holding 7 swords, the fighting continued for minutes more and numerous Confederates were able to escape back to Hare Ridge. The 3 Union regiments lost 390 440 of 1,184 engaged, but they had blunted Davis's attack, prevented them from striking the rear of the Iron Brigade, and so overwhelmed the Confederate brigade that it was unable to participate significantly in combat for the rest of the day. The Confederate losses were about 500 killed and wounded and over 200 prisoners out of 1,707 engaged. Midday lull. By 11:30 a.m., the battlefield was temporarily quiet. On the Confederate side, Henry Heth faced an embarrassing situation. He had been under orders from General Lee to avoid a general engagement until the full Army of Northern Virginia had concentrated in the area. But his excursion to Gettysburg, ostensibly to find shoes, was essentially a reconnaissance in force conducted by a full infantry division. This indeed had started a general engagement and Heth was on the losing side so far. By 12:30 p.m., his remaining 2 brigades, under Brigadier General J. Johnston Pettigrew and Colonel John M. Brockenborough, had arrived on the scene, as had the division of Major General Dorsey Pender, also from Hill's Corps. Hill's remaining division did not arrive until late in the day. Considerably more Confederate forces were on the way, however. 2 divisions of the Second Corps, commanded by Lieutenant General Richard S. Ewell, were approaching Gettysburg from the north, from the towns of Carlisle and York. The 5 brigades of Major General Robert E. Rhodes marched down the Carlisle Road but left it before reaching town to advance down the wooded crest of Oak Ridge, where they could link up with the left flank of Hill's Corps. The 4 brigades under Major General Jubal A early approached on the Harrisburg Road. Union cavalry outposts north of the town detected both movements. Ewell's remaining division did not arrive until late in the day. On the Union side, Doubleday reorganized his lines as more units of the I Corps arrived. First on hand was the Corps Artillery under Colonel Charles S. Wainwright, followed by 2 brigades from Doubleday's division, now commanded by Brigadier General Thomas A. Rowley, which Doubleday placed on either end of his line. The 11 Corps arrived from the south before noon, moving up the Taneytown and Emmitsburg roads. Major General Oliver O. Howard was surveying the area from the roof of the Farnstock Brothers dry goods store downtown at about 11:30 when he heard that Reynolds had been killed and that he was now in command of all Union forces on the field. He recalled, "My heart was heavy and the situation was grave indeed, but surely I did not hesitate a moment. God helping us, we will stay here till the army comes." I assumed the command of the field. Howard immediately sent messengers to summon reinforcements from the 3 Corps and the 12 Corps. Howard's 1st 11 Corps Division to arrive, under Major General Carl Schurz, was sent north to take a position on Oak Ridge and link up with the right of the I Corps. The division of Brigadier General Francis C. Barlow was placed on Schurz's right to support him. The 3rd Division to arrive, under Brigadier General Adolph von Stein, was placed on Cemetery Hill along with 2 batteries of artillery to hold the hill as a rallying point if the Union troops could not hold their positions. This placement on the hill corresponded with orders sent earlier in the day to Howard by Reynolds just before he was killed. However, Rhodes beat shirts to Oak Hill, so the 11th Corps Division was forced to take up positions in the broad plain north of the town, below and to the east of Oak Hill. They linked up with the I Corps Reserve Division of Brigadier General John C. Robinson, whose 2 brigades had been sent forward by Doubleday when he heard about Ewell's arrival. Howard's defensive line was not a particularly strong one in the north. He was soon outnumbered, and the terrain his men occupied in the north was poorly selected for defense. He held out some hope that reinforcements from Slockham's 12th Corps would arrive up the Baltimore Pike in time to make a difference. Afternoon. In the afternoon, there was fighting both west and north of Gettysburg. Ewell, on Oak Hill with Rhodes, saw Howard's troops deploying before him, and he interpreted this as the start of an attack and implicit permission to set aside General Lee's order not to bring about a general engagement. Rhodes' attacks from Oak Hill. Rhodes initially sent 3 brigades south against Union troops that represented the right flank of the I Corps and the left flank of the 11th Corps. From east to west, Brigadier General George P. Doles, Colonel Edward A. O'Neill, and Brigadier General Alfred Iverson. Doles's Georgia Brigade stood guarding the flank, awaiting the arrival of Early's division. Both O'Neill's and Iverson's attacks fared poorly against the 6 veteran regiments in the brigade of Brigadier General Henry Baxter, manning a line in a shallow inverted V, facing north on the ridge behind the Chambersburg Road. O'Neill's men were sent forward without coordinating with Iverson on their flank and fell back under heavy fire from the I Corps troops. Iverson failed to perform even a rudimentary reconnaissance and sent his men forward blindly while he stayed in the rear. More of Baxter's men were concealed in woods behind a stone wall and rose to fire withering volleys from less than 100 yards away, creating over 800 casualties among the 1,350 North Carolinians. Stories are told about groups of dead bodies lying in almost parade ground formations, heels of their boots perfectly aligned. Baxter's brigade was worn down and out of ammunition. At 3 p.m. he withdrew his brigade, and General Robinson replaced it with the brigade of Brigadier General Gabriel Paul. Rhodes then committed his 2 reserve brigades, Brigadier Gens. Junius Daniel and Dodson Ramseur. Ramseur attacked first, but Paul's brigade held its crucial position. Paul had a bullet go in one temple and out the other, blinding him permanently. Before the end of the day, 3 other commanders of that brigade were wounded. Daniel's North Carolina Brigade then attempted to break the I Corps line to the southwest along the Chambersburg Pike. They ran into stiff resistance from Colonel Roy Stone's Pennsylvania Bucktail Brigade in the same area around the railroad cut as the morning's battle. Fierce fighting eventually ground to a standstill. Heth renews his attack. General Lee arrived on the battlefield at about 2:30 p.m., as Rhodes's men were in mid-attack. Seeing that a major assault was underway, he lifted his restriction on a general engagement and gave permission to Hill to resume his attacks from the morning. First in line was Heth's division again, with 2 fresh brigades, Pettigrew's North Carolinians and Colonel John M. Brockenborough's Virginians. Pettigrew's brigade was deployed in a line that extended south beyond the ground defended by the Iron Brigade. Enveloping the left flank of the 19th Indiana, Pettigrew's North Carolinians, the largest brigade in the Army, drove back the Iron Brigade in some of the fiercest fighting of the war. The Iron Brigade was pushed out of the woods, made 3 temporary stands in the open ground to the east, but then had to fall back toward the Lutheran Theological Seminary. General Meredith was downed with a head wound, made all the worse when his horse fell on him. To the left of the Iron Brigade was the brigade of Colonel Chapman Biddle, defending open ground on McPherson Ridge, but they were outflanked and decimated. To the right, Stone's Bucktails, facing both west and north along the Chambersburg Pike, were attacked by both Brockenborough and Daniel. Casualties were severe that afternoon. The 26th North Carolina lost heavily, leaving the first day's fight with around 212 men. Their commander, Colonel Henry K. Burgwin, was fatally wounded by a bullet through his chest. By the end of the 3-day battle, they had about 152 men standing, the highest casualty percentage for one battle of any other regiment, North or South. One of the Union regiments, the 24th Michigan, lost 399 of 496. It had 9 color bearers shot down, and its commander, Colonel Henry A. Morrow, was wounded in the head and captured. The 151st Pennsylvania of Biddle's brigade lost 337 of 467. The highest-ranking casualty of this engagement was General Heth, who was struck by a bullet in the head. He was apparently saved because he had stuffed wads of paper into a new hat, which was otherwise too large for his head. But there were 2 consequences to this glancing blow. Heth was unconscious for over 24 hours and had no further command involvement in the 3-day battle. He was also unable to urge Pender's division to move forward and supplement his struggling assault. Pender was oddly passive during this phase of the battle. The typically more aggressive tendencies of a young general in Lee's army would have seen him move forward on his own accord. Hill shared the blame for failing to order him forward as well, but he claimed illness. History cannot know Pender's motivations. He was mortally wounded the next day and left no report. Early attacks 11 Corps, Major General Oliver O. Howard of the 11th Corps had a difficult defensive problem. He had only 2 divisions to cover the wide expanse of featureless farmland north of town. He and Major General Carl Schurz, temporarily in command of the Corps while Howard was in overall command on the field, deployed the division of Brigadier General Alexander Schimmelpfennig on the left and Brigadier General Francis C. Barlow on the right. From the left, the brigades were Schimmelpfennig's, Colonel Wartziemiecki 1 Quarteranowski, Brigadier General Adelbert Ames, and Colonel Leopold von Gilser. Howard recalled that he selected this line as a logical continuation of the I Corps line formed on his left. This decision has been criticized by historians, such as Edwin B. Coddington, as being too far forward, with the right flank vulnerable to envelopment by the enemy. Making the Federal defense more difficult, Barlow advanced farther north than Schimmelpfennig's division, occupying a 50-foot elevation above Rock Creek named Blocker's Knoll. Barlow's justification was that he wanted to prevent Doz's brigade, of Rhodes's division, from occupying it and using it as an artillery platform against him. General Schurz claimed afterward that Barlow had misunderstood his orders by taking this position. By taking the Knoll, Barlow was following Howard's directive to obstruct the advance of Early's division, and in doing so, deprive him of an artillery platform, as von Stein fortified the position on Cemetery Hill. The position on the Knoll turned out to be unfortunate, as it created a salient in the line that could be assaulted from multiple sides. Schurz ordered Ktsire 1 Quarteranowski's brigade, which had heretofore been sitting en masse at the north end of town forward to assist Barlow's 2 brigades on the Knoll, but they arrived too late and in insufficient numbers to help. Historian Harry W. Fans judges Barlow's decision to be a blunder that ensured the defeat of the Corps. Richard Ewell's 2nd Division, under Jubal A, swept down the Harrisburg Road, deployed in a battle line 3 brigades wide, almost a mile across and almost half a mile wider than the Union defensive line. Early started with a large-scale artillery bombardment. The Georgia Brigade of Brigadier General John B. Gordon was then directed for a frontal attack against Barlow's Knoll, pinning down the defenders, while the brigades of Brigadier General Harry T. Hayes and Colonel Isaac E. Avery swung around their exposed flank. At the same time the Georgians under Doles launched a synchronized assault with Gordon. The defenders of Barlow's Knoll targeted by Gordon were 900 men of von Gilser's brigade. In May, 2 of his regiments had been the initial target of Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson's flanking attack at Chancellorsville. The men of the 54th and 68th New York held out as long as they could, but they were overwhelmed. Then the 153rd Pennsylvania succumbed. Barlow, attempting to rally his troops, was shot in the side and captured. Barlow's 2nd Brigade, under Ames, came under attack by Doles and Gordon. Both Union brigades conducted a disorderly retreat to the south. On the left flank of the 11th Corps, the attack focused on General Schimmelpfennig's division. They were subjected to a deadly artillery crossfire from Rhodes and Early's batteries, and as they deployed they were attacked by Doles' infantry. Early's troops were able to employ a flanking attack and roll up the division from the right, and they fell back in confusion toward the town. A desperate counterattack by the 157th New York from von Amsberg's brigade was surrounded on three sides, causing it to suffer 307 casualties. General Howard, witnessing this disaster, sent forward an artillery battery and an infantry brigade from von Stein's reserve force, under Colonel Charles Custer. Custer's battle line just north of the town in a brick yard was overwhelmed by Hayes and Avery. He provided valuable cover for the retreating soldiers, but at a high price. Of Custer's 800 men, 313 were captured, as were two of the four guns from the battery. The collapse of the 11th Corps was completed by 4 p.m., after a fight of less than an hour. They suffered 3,200 casualties, about half the number sent forward from Cemetery Hill. The losses in Gordon's and Dozer's brigades were under 750. Rhodes and Pender breakthrough. Rhodes's original faulty attack at 2 o'clock had stalled, but he launched his reserve brigade, under Ramseur, against Paul's brigade in the salient on the Mummersburg Road, with Doles's brigade against the left flank of the 11th Corps. Daniel's brigade resumed its attack, now to the east against Baxter on Oak Ridge. This time Rhodes was more successful, mostly because Early coordinated an attack on his flank. In the west, the Union troops had fallen back to the seminary and built hasty breastworks running 600 yards north-south before the western face of Schmucker Hall, bolstered by 20 guns of Wainwright's battalion. Dorsey Pender's division of Hill's Corps stepped through the exhausted lines of Heth's men at about 4 p.m. to finish off the I Corps survivors. The brigade of Brigadier General Alfred M. Scales attacked first, on the northern flank. His 5 regiments of 1,400 North Carolinians were virtually annihilated in one of the fiercest artillery barrages of the war, rivaling Pickett's charge to come, but on a more concentrated scale. 20 guns spaced only 5 yards apart fired spherical case, explosive shells, canister, and double canister rounds into the approaching brigade, which emerged from the fight with only 500 men standing and a single lieutenant in command. Scales wrote afterwards that he found only a squad here and there marked the place where regiments had rested. The attack continued in the southern central area, where Colonel Abner M. Perrin ordered his South Carolina brigade to advance rapidly without pausing to fire. Perrin was prominently on horseback leading his men but miraculously was untouched. He directed his men to a weak point in the breastworks on the Union left, a 50-yard gap between Biddle's left-hand regiment, the 121st Pennsylvania, and Gamble's cavalrymen, attempting to guard the flank. They broke through, enveloping the Union line and rolling it up to the north as Scales's men continued to pin down the right flank. By 4:30 p.m., the Union position was untenable, and the men could see the 11th Corps retreating from the northern battle, pursued by masses of Confederates. Doubleday ordered a withdrawal east to Cemetery Hill. On the southern flank, the North Carolina Brigade of Brigadier General James H. Lane contributed little to the assault. He was kept busy by a clash with Union cavalry on the Hagerstown Road. Brigadier General Edward L. Thomas's Georgia Brigade was in reserve well to the rear, not summoned by Pender or Hill to assist or exploit the breakthrough. Union retreat. The sequence of retreating units remains unclear. Each of the two corps cast blame on the other. There are 3 main versions of events extant. The first, most prevalent, version is that the fiasco on Barlow's Knoll triggered a collapse that ran counterclockwise around the line. The second is that both Barlow's line and the seminary defense collapsed at about the same time. The third is that Robinson's division in the center gave way and that spread both left and right. General Howard told General Meade that his corps was forced to retreat only because the I Corps collapsed first on his flank, which may have reduced his embarrassment but was unappreciated by Doubleday and his men. Union troops retreated in different states of order. The brigades on Seminary Ridge were said to move deliberately and slowly, keeping in control, although Colonel Wainwright's artillery was not informed of the order to retreat and found themselves alone. When Wainwright realized his situation, he ordered his gun crews to withdraw at a walk, not wishing to panic the infantry and start a rout. As pressure eventually increased, Wainwright ordered his 17 remaining guns to gallop down Chambersburg Street, 3 abreast. A.P. Hill failed to commit any of his reserves to the pursuit of the Seminary defenders, a great missed opportunity. Near the railroad cut, Daniel's brigade renewed their assault, and almost 500 Union soldiers surrendered and were taken prisoner. Paul's brigade, under attack by Rumsey, became seriously isolated and General Robinson ordered it to withdraw. He ordered the 16th Maine to hold its position at any cost as a rearguard against the enemy pursuit. The regiment, commanded by Colonel Charles Tilden, returned to the stone wall on the Chambersburg Road, and their fierce fire gave sufficient time for the rest of the brigade to escape, which they did, in considerably more disarray than those from the Seminary. The 16th Maine started the day with 298 men, but at the end of this holding action there were only 35 survivors. For the 11th Corps, it was a sad reminder of their retreat at Chancellorsville in May. Under heavy pursuit by Hayes and Avery, they clogged the streets of the town. No one in the Corps had planned routes for this contingency. Hand-to-hand fighting broke out in various places. Parts of the Corps conducted an organized fighting retreat, such as Custer's stand in the Brickyard. The private citizens of Gettysburg panicked amidst the turmoil, and artillery shells bursting overhead and fleeing refugees added to the congestion. Some soldiers sought to avoid capture by hiding in basements and in fenced backyards. General Alexander Schimmelpfennig was one such person who climbed a fence and hid behind a woodpile in the kitchen garden of the Garlock family for the rest of the three-day battle. The only advantage that the 11th Corps soldiers had was that they were familiar with the route to Cemetery Hill, having passed through that way in the morning. Many in the I Corps, including senior officers, did not know where the cemetery was. As the Union troops climbed Cemetery Hill, they encountered the determined Major General Winfield Scott Hancock. At midday, General Meade was 9 miles south of Gettysburg in Taneytown, Maryland, when he heard that Reynolds had been killed. He immediately dispatched Hancock, commander of the two corps and his most trusted subordinate, to the scene with orders to take command of the field and to determine whether Gettysburg was an appropriate place for a major battle. When Hancock arrived on Cemetery Hill, he met with Howard and they had a brief disagreement about Meade's command order. As the senior officer, Howard yielded only grudgingly to Hancock's direction. Although Hancock arrived after 4 p.m. and commanded no units on the field that day, he took control of the Union troops arriving on the hill and directed them to defensive positions with his imperious and defiant persona. As to the choice of Gettysburg as the battlefield, Hancock told Howard, "I think this the strongest position by nature upon which to fight a battle that I ever saw." When Howard agreed, Hancock concluded the discussion, "Very well, sir, I select this as the battlefield." Brigadier General Gouverneur K. Warren, chief engineer of the Army of the Potomac, inspected the ground and concurred with Hancock. Evening General Lee also understood the defensive potential to the Union Army if they held the high ground of Cemetery Hill. He sent orders to Ewell to carry the hill occupied by the enemy, if he found it practicable, but to avoid a general engagement until the arrival of the other divisions of the army. In the face of this discretionary, and possibly contradictory, order, Ewell chose not to attempt the assault. One reason posited was the battle fatigue of his men in the late afternoon, although Allegheny Johnson's division of Ewell's corps was within an hour of arriving on the battlefield. Another was the difficulty of assaulting the hill through the narrow corridors afforded by the streets of Gettysburg immediately to the north. Ewell requested assistance from A.P. Hill, but that general felt his corps was too depleted from the day's battle and General Lee did not want to bring up Major General Richard H. Anderson's division from the reserve. Ewell did consider taking Culp's Hill, which would have made the Union position on Cemetery Hill untenable. However, Jubal A opposed the idea when it was reported that Union troops were approaching on the York Pike, and he sent the brigades of John B. Gordon and Brigadier General William Extra Billy Smith to block the perceived threat. Early urged waiting for Johnson's division to take the hill. After Johnson's division arrived via the Chambersburg Pike, it maneuvered toward the east of town in preparation to take the hill, but a small reconnaissance party sent in advance encountered a picket line of the 7th Indiana Infantry, which opened fire and captured a Confederate officer and soldier. The remainder of the Confederates fled and attempts to seize Culp's Hill on July 1 came to an end. Lee's order has been criticized because it left too much discretion to Ewell. Numerous historians and proponents of the Lost Cause movement have speculated how the more aggressive Stonewall Jackson would have acted on this order if he had lived to command this wing of Lee's army, and how differently the second day of battle would have proceeded with Confederate artillery on Cemetery Hill, commanding the length of Cemetery Ridge and the Federal lines of communications on the Baltimore Pike. Stephen W. Sears has suggested that General Meade would have invoked his original plan for a defensive line on Pipe Creek and withdrawn the Army of the Potomac, although that movement would have been a dangerous operation under pressure from Lee. Most of the rest of both armies arrived that evening or early the next morning. Johnson's division joined Ewell and Major General Richard H. Anderson's joined Hill. Two of the three divisions of the First Corps, commanded by Lieutenant General James Longstreet, arrived in the morning. Three cavalry brigades under Maj General J. E. B. Stuart were still out of the area, on a wide-ranging raid to the northeast. General Lee sorely felt the loss of the eyes and ears of the army. Stuart's absence had contributed to the accidental start of the battle that morning and left Lee unsure about enemy dispositions through most of July 2. On the Union side, Meade arrived after midnight. The 2 Corps and 3 Corps took up positions on Cemetery Ridge, and the 12 Corps and the V Corps were nearby to the east. Only the 6th Corps was a significant distance from the battlefield, marching rapidly to join the Army of the Potomac. The first day at Gettysburg more significant than simply a prelude to the bloody second and third days ranks as the 23rd biggest battle of the war by number of troops engaged. About 1/4 of Meade's army and 1/3 of Lee's army were engaged. Union casualties were almost 9,000, Confederate slightly more than 6,000. Notes. References: Adkin, Mark. The Gettysburg Companion, The Complete Guide to America's Most Famous Battle. Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, Stackpole Books, 2008. ISBN 978-0-8117-0439-7. Bess, Edwin C. Fields of Honor, Pivotal Battles of the Civil War. Washington, D.C., National Geographic Society, 2006. ISBN 0-7922-7568-3. Busy, John W., and David G. Martin. Regimental Strengths and Losses at Gettysburg 4th ed. Hightstown, New Jersey, Longstreet House, 2005. ISBN 0-944413-67-6. Coddington, Edwin B. The Gettysburg Campaign. A Study in Command. New York, Scribner's, 1968. ISBN 0-684-84569-5. Acher, David J. The Longest Night, A Military History of the Civil War. New York, Simon & Schuster, 2001. ISBN 0-684-84944-5. Gottfried, Bradley M. Brigades of Gettysburg. New York, Da Capo Press, 2002. ISBN 0-306-81175-8. Makowski, Chris, and Christopher D. White. Second Guessing Dick Ewell, Why Didn't the Confederate General Take Cemetery Hill on July 1, 1863? Civil War Times, August 2010. Martin, David G. Gettysburg July 1 Rev. ed. Sons Hoboken, Pennsylvania, Combined Publishing, 1996. ISBN 0-938289-81-0. Petruzzi, J. David, and Stephen Stanley. The Complete Gettysburg Guide. New York, Savas Beatty, 2009. ISBN 978-1-932714-63-0. Fans, Harry W. The Battle of Gettysburg. National Park Service Civil War Series. Fort Washington, Pennsylvania, U.S. National Park Service and Eastern National, 1994. ISBN 0-915992-63-9. Fans, Harry W. Gettysburg The First Day. Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina Press, 2001. ISBN 0-8078-2624-3. Sears, Stephen W. Gettysburg. Boston, Houghton Mifflin, 2003. ISBN 0-395-86761-4. Trudeau, Noah Andre. Gettysburg, A Testing of Courage. New York, HarperCollins, 2002. ISBN 0-06-019363-8. Further reading, Bess, Edwin C. Receding Tide, Vicksburg and Gettysburg, The Campaigns That Changed the Civil War. Washington, D.C., National Geographic Society, 2010. ISBN 978-1-4262-0510-1. Catton, Bruce. Glory Road. Garden City, New York, Doubleday and Company, 1952. ISBN 0-385-04167-5. Foote, Shelby. The Civil War, A Narrative. Volume 2, Fredericksburg to Meridian. New York, Random House, 1958. ISBN 0-394-49517-9. Freeman, Douglas S. Lee's Lieutenants, A Study in Command, 3 vols. New York, Scribner, 1946. ISBN 0-684-85979-3. Freeman, Douglas S. R. E. Lee, A Biography. 4 vols. New York, Scribner, 1934. Gottfried, Bradley M. The Maps of Gettysburg, An Atlas of the Gettysburg Campaign, June 3 June 13, 1863. New York, Savers Beatty, 2007. ISBN 978-1-932714-30-2. Grimsley, Mark, and Brooks D. Simpson. Gettysburg, A Battlefield Guide. Lincoln, University of Nebraska Press, 1999. ISBN 0-8032-7077-1. Hall, Jeffrey C. The Stand of the U.S. Army at Gettysburg. Bloomington, Indiana University Press, 2003. ISBN 0-253-34258-9. Leno, Philip. Gettysburg Campaign Atlas. 2nd ed. Dayton, Ohio, Gatehouse Press, 2009. ISBN 978-1-934900-45-1. Teague, Chaplain Chuck. Barlow's Knoll Revisited, Military History Online website, access July 9, 2013. External links, Flags of the First Day, an online exhibit of Iron Brigade and Confederate battle flags from July 1, 1863, No Man Can Take Those Colors and Live, the epic battle between the 24th Michigan and 26th North Carolina at Gettysburg.